Hi there and welcome to another video from Hegarty Maths. It's Mr. Hegarty here, and in this video we are solving three-step equations. Let's start with things we already know. You should know how to solve a two-step equation, so pause the video and double check you can do both of these. Solve for x. Right, showing you the answers. Hopefully you got, using the balance method, x is 5 over 2 for the first one and x was 29 in the second one. If you can't do that, make sure you go back and work on the two-step equations before we proceed. Now what's this video about? Well, these ones, two things happened to x. It got doubled and then afterwards you added 1. In this case, you added 1 and then you divided by 5. Three-step equations are going to be when three things happen to x beforehand, so you're going to need three inverse operations to find x. So let me give you an example. In this case here, what happened to x? Well, let's just draw a picture of what happened to x. The first thing, as we're going along this way, you multiplied it by 2, afterwards you added 1, and finally you divided all that answer by 5. So clearly, to go backwards, to do the inverse steps, we're going to first multiply by 5, we're then going to subtract 1, and finally we're going to divide by 2 to solve for x and find what it is. And that's what we're doing in this video, examples exactly like that. If you feel like you can do each one, pause the video and try yourself and then mark yours against mine. Otherwise you can watch me and copy as I do. So let's do that first one there. Remember what happened to x? You multiplied by 2 first, then you added 1, and then you divided by 5 when you were creating the problem. So when we're going backwards, we're going to multiply both sides by 5, subtract 1, and divide by 2. So let's do that. Multiply both sides by 5, like that, and that undoes the divide by 5 on the left hand side, and we're simply left therefore with 2x add 1 is equal to 6 multiplied by 5 is 30. Now we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. We want the x by itself, and therefore on the left hand side we've got 2x, and on the right hand side we're going to have 29, and finally we're going to divide both sides by 2 to undo that, multiply by 2 there, and we're going to get ourselves the answer x is equal to 29 over 2, which we're just going to leave as an improper fraction there. You could try substituting that back in. 2 times 29 over 2 is 29, 29 add 1 is 30, 30 divided by 5 is 6. We've checked it and indeed we got the right answer. Next one. Pause and have a go. Okay, first things first, I like the x being on the left hand side of the equal sign, so I'm going to rewrite it if you don't mind. I'm going to rewrite this as x add 1 over 2 add 5 is equal to 11. Now I'm going to do operations to both sides to find x by itself. Now, thinking what happened to x, the first thing, 1 got added to it, then the answer was divided by 2, and finally we added 5 to that. So going backwards, what we're going to do? Well, we're going to do the inverse operations, subtract 5, multiply by 2, and take away 1. So let's start by undoing this add 5. Let's take away 5 from both sides. What am I going to be left with? Well, on the right hand side I'm going to be left with 11 subtract 5, which is 6, and here I'm just going to be left with, on the left hand side, x add 1 over 2. Now I'm going to undo that divide by 2 by multiplying both sides of the equation by 2, which cancels that 2 there, and I'm simply left with x add 1 is equal to 6 multiplied by 2 is 12, and the last thing, I'm going to subtract 1 off both sides, and I'm going to get myself x is equal to 11. What should I do before I move on? Let's double check it actually works up here. 11 add 1 is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 add 5 is 11. Put a smiley face to say you checked it. Done. Next one. Pause, have a go. Okay. Let's think here what we can do. What happened to x? Well, it's quite complicated, but what happened to x? Because that's actually negative 1x, we can think of it as we multiplied by negative 1, then 3 was added, we added 3, and then we divided by 2. So to undo the process, we're going to double it, we're going to subtract 3, and then we're going to Again, divide by negative 1 is the opposite of multiplying by negative 1, so we can divide both sides by negative 1, let's say. So let's try that. Let's double both sides, and that obviously cancels the 2, and we're left with 3 subtract x is equal to 5 multiplied by 2 is 10. Now I'm going to subtract 3 off both sides, and what will I be left with? 3 take away 3 is 0. I purposely did that. I'm not just going to have x, I have negative x. Be careful there. Negative x is equal to 10 subtract 3, which is 7. And lastly, I'm going to divide by this hidden negative 1 there. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. So I'm left with x is equal to positive 7 divided by negative 1. A positive divided by a negative is overall negative. 7 divided by 1 is just 7. And before I go on, let's just double check that works. 3 subtract negative 7 is like 3 add 7, which is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. I indeed got the right answer. Next one, pause, have a go. Now in a previous video I said when you have brackets, usually it's best to multiply them out. So let's do that to start with. Here's our first step. Multiply out this. We get 15 subtract 5x is equal to 10. Two options at this point. You could, I'll just do option 1 this way and I'll do option 2 this way afterwards. You can just undo this here by, let's write that here like this. I'm just going to do the two different ways. I don't know if you remember them. The first thing you could do is you could subtract the 15 off both sides. And what would I get left on the left hand side? I would have not 5x but negative 5x is equal to 10 subtract 15, which is negative 5. And then what I do is I divide both sides not by 5 but by negative 5, and we get ourselves the answer. X here is equal to negative 5 divided by negative 5 is positive 1. The alternative at this stage, do you remember I said you could multiply everything by negative 1? Just because you've got a negative 5x there, and sometimes it's neater to just have a positive amount of x's. So if you multiply everything by negative 1, negatives become positives and positives become negatives. The equivalent equation would be 5x subtract 15 is equal to negative 10. And do the same old thing. We're going to add 15 to both sides. And we'd get ourselves that 5x is equal to 5. Then we divide both sides by 5 and we'd get ourselves x is 1, just like before. But it's up to you which of the two you choose. And before you move on, just double check x is 1 works. 3 subtract 1 is 2. 5 multiplied by 2 is 10. Draw yourself your little smiley face because you've checked it and you know you've got the right answer. Okay, the last question for this video. Do pause, have a go yourself. Right, I've got a divide by 5 here, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 5 to undo that divide by 5. Those 5's will therefore cancel on this side, and I'm going to get myself 3 subtract 2x is 10 multiplied by 5 is 50. Now I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, and I'm going to get myself, not that 2x is 47, but that negative 2x. It's very important that you remember that's actually negative 2x is equal to 47. And last thing, I'm going to divide by what? That's right, divide by negative 2 both sides. And I'm going to get myself that x is equal to a positive 47 divided by a negative 2 is going to overall be a negative answer, and we can leave it as 47 over 2 as an improper fraction. If you want to check that actually works, up here 2 multiplied by negative 47 over 2, well that's going to be negative 47. 3 subtract negative 47 is 50. 50 divided by 5 is 10. Yep, you got the right answer. And that's it for this video. Thanks loads for watching.